Hey y'all, and welcome back to Bourbon and Bones. This is our 18th episode, and if you're new to our channel here, welcome, and if you are a faithful follower, welcome back. So if you like what we're doing, like, comment, and subscribe below, and also join us on Facebook and Instagram. We're doing some fun things there, and so go ahead and check us out. So as we enter into autumn and it gets colder everywhere else in the country but here, many of us are looking in to settle in for our long winter's nap. Perhaps a book in hand, perhaps a little bit of Shakespeare. A little bit in front of the fireplace, a nice dram in hand, and many people I think are asking, what should that dram be? And I would highly suggest a Midwinters night dram. Now this bottle comes to us out of High West Distillery in Park City, Utah, and is very looked forward to by rye drinkers every single year. To get to know this bottle a bit better, let's dig into the history. High West Distillery began after founder David Perkins and his wife Jane went to a wedding in Kentucky. And while they were there, they popped down to Loretto and visited Maker's Mark. Now while on the tour, David, currently a biochemist, saw the correlation between fermentation process in making bourbon and making pharmaceuticals. And after that trip, David talked to his wife and they decided to pack up the family out of California and moved to Park City, Utah in 2004 to be far away from the Kentucky powerhouses and to be much closer to the ski resorts that his family are so fond of. Then in 2006, High West began to blend whiskey, and in 2007, they began producing their own juice. While it's interesting to think about that people hear the term blended whiskey and people always think cheap. And I think that really dates back to the dark ages of bourbon and to blended scotch. It's almost like an inferior product. But really when you look at the history of bourbon and even bourbons being currently made, there's a lot more blended whiskey out there than I think many of us are aware of. I do, however, believe that High West kind of gets a bit of a pass on that because of how expertly blended the whiskey is. So currently now the High West is blending their whiskeys with others from around the country, and they're making very unique bourbons, ryes, and American whiskey. Now to help get off the ground, David got Jim Rutledge from Four Roses to help out as well and help with the blending process and helping them get into making their own whiskey as well. And Four Roses themselves have been doing this practically forever. So it's a really good person to be pulling in onto the team. So from 2006 to 2017, High West went from a 10,000 barrel facility to a 70,000 barrel facility. And the company has done so well that after 12 years, David sold it to Constellation Brands for a reported $160 million. And I would be first in line at that opportunity as well. So, and I know what you're thinking. Overall, Utah. Why Utah? Of all places in the country, why Utah? And I hear you completely. I thought the same thing. And through my research this week, a lot of interesting history about Utah came up and in the world of American hooch. In 1870, the last known legal still was installed. And in 1884, Park City, Utah miners frequented Utah's best watering hole, which was one of the very last saloons in the Wild West. Then in 1833, Utah provided the 36th vote out of 48 to repeal the Volstead Act and end prohibition. And in 2006, High West became the first legal distiller in the state of Nevada, the state of Utah, since 1870, 136 years apart. Also, the idea that David had was to be a true Wild West style whiskey company. And they wanted to be unique and not a copy of anything else being done in the United States. And it's really an interesting story because David Perkins was in his 40s when he began his whiskey journey. And for many of us, that gives hope to us all. Well now, let's dig into the bottle a bit more. First off, I love this label. In fact, I love Shakespeare. And the idea that a company is playing off one of the bard's tales, I just genuinely love it. On the front, the font and the picture are taken from a copy of the first quarto in 1600s of A Midsummer's Night Dream. Now this is actually a blend of straight rye whiskeys and finished in French oak port barrels. Now this is a limited engagement. Pause for laughter. of Act 8, Scene 3 of the production, which is kind of funny because there are actually only 5 acts in the play itself. And it is 49.3% alcohol by volume, so 98.6 proof. And on the back here, there are 2 quotes from the play, and the first is from Demetrius, and the second is from Lysander, most notably. So swift as a shadow, short as any dream, brief as the lightning in the coiled night. And Lysander here is describing how quickly love can fade and pass away. And unfortunately, I feel like this bottle is very easily going to pass away into our dreams on a cold winter's evening. And there's a lot of hype about this bottle. So let's finally dig into the rye. So right on the nose, you get breakfast cereal and rye bread. A dark fruit note and some kind of the smell of old oak that's been in the sun has this little bit of a scent from that. On the palate, it's bold. It is spiced fruit cakes, ginger, definitely a punchy rye still. You still get this bold baking spice rye that's really specific, but it still has this baked, dense cake quality. And a little bit of dark fruit, still this dried dark fruit. It's almost a fruit cake that you actually would want to eat in a glass. And it's this nice medium finish. If I could say if the finish were a bit longer, I'd be happier, but it has this nice cinnamon kind of finish that kind of just drifts through. Still, second sip, you have this dark fruit kind of slowly pushes forward, but it's still that fruit cakiness, this wonderful aged, almost like an Armagnac that has been kind of soaked into the fruitcake. This is, I know that sounds kind of sweet, but this isn't a sweet drink. This is actually a really almost a drying punchiness, but it has a lot of those baked qualities. Yeah, that's really nice. So as always, we're going to take a quick break, and I'm going to take a quick rest on my palate, and we'll be back with a Midwinter's Night Dram with a little bit of water in a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back to Bourbon and Bones. Again, we are here with Midwinter's Night Dram with a bit of water. Let's see how it's changed. So on the nose, it's a lot less intense. You get ginger and a little bit of rye breadness, but it's almost like toasted rye bread, like right out of a toaster. And a bit of vanilla right at the end. It kind of has this vanilla quality that definitely was not there before. And the rye just smooths out. I mean, with a little bit of water, it gets dark fruit, you start getting more caramel, a little bit of vanilla. It actually kind of simplifies, but is still this very approachable flavor, but it really changes with a bit of water. Yeah, still like your dark fruit, little bit of bakingness to it. Almost like a candied ginger, like a honeyed ginger kind of quality. You still get a little bit of that bakingness, but it really pulls back a lot. It becomes more, honestly, it becomes a bit more bourbon-like than a rye. But I am noticing that it has this longer finish. It almost is like cloves. Kind of hangs onto the palate and kind of drifts the rest of the way. Very interesting evolution. And so, of course, the verdict. I will say this, I look forward to this bottle every single year. This is one of my favorite ryes to sip on. You will never find this in a cocktail for me. I'm never gonna throw it in one. I just think it's phenomenal. And just beyond the fact that I love Shakespeare. I love the play on words. I love what the idea is behind it. It's a blended whiskey that has been blended to perfection. And I think we really need to stop and think about blended whiskeys a little bit, at least in the US, of who's blending it and are they doing a good job? There's plenty of blended whiskey out there that isn't great. Some of it is just bad. But there are companies like High West that are producing high quality blended whiskeys exceptionally well. And this is in my opinion, their crowning achievement every single year of the best blended whiskey out there. And I love this rye. If you have an opportunity to find it, definitely snatch it up. It's a little pricey. I think the MSRP is around $100, $110, but it's definitely something you will turn to more often than you ever think you would for a rye. I'm gonna definitely say I think it's a bit more complex neat than with a bit of water. For me, it kind of evolves more into a bourbon with some water, which is pleasant. It might be a good approach into ryes for people. But for me, I think this just sings as just a good, neat pour. So, tell me what you think below. Have you had this bottle? Are you interested in getting this bottle? Let me know. For our final transition this evening, we're gonna head to Chicago. And yet again, to the Carboniferous period, some 300 million years ago. As opposed to the last series of fossils, turning into coal, these are very small pictures into the past as fossil nodules. Now, what I mean by that is that the fossils that you discover look like this, little flat, round rocks. But as they freeze and thaw, and as you freeze and thaw them, they actually crack open to reveal a fossil inside. So these are fossil nodules. So this one here, Pecopteris Hemitelioides, a small fern. And you might be wondering why this one was trapped in a pod and not turned into coal like some of the other fossils we've seen here on Bourbon and Bones. As they say, location, location, location. This part of Illinois was an outlet of a massive river that flowed into a huge inland sea, much like how the Mississippi flows into the Gulf of Mexico. And it washes fish, plants, and sediment into the Gulf. Now this sea was shallow, and I mean so shallow you could have walked from Cleveland to the central coast of Iowa. And yes, at that time, Iowa had a coast. And your head would never dip below the waterline, unless you were short. And this river fed into that sea, and plants and animals were quickly covered up by sediment and fossilized instead of being turned into coal like you saw in other parts of the country. This fossil was discovered by me at the Mazon Braidwood State Fish and Wildlife Area in Illinois. And at the time it was a huge, one of the largest coal fields in the country, because a lot of these specimens actually did turn into fossils, into fossil fuels like coal. And a lot of the miners would find these nodules and would just throw them away because they were just rocks. They didn't have any coal in them. And so what was left are these huge refuse piles everywhere. And the state has opened up the entire area for amateur paleontologists, for professional paleontologists all over the world to go hunting for fossils. And I've collected 5 or 6 5-gallon buckets of these specimens, and I have put them in water and stuck them in my deep freeze to the annoyance of the girlfriend, pulled them out and thawed, put them back in, pulled them out, and slowly what happens is the water creeps into the fossil and cracks them open, revealing the fossil inside. But for every 1 fossil you find 50 that are blank or so poorly preserved that they can't even be noticed or identified. And this is one of the best places in the world that have these types of animals and flora and fauna trapped in these little nodules. And the state of Illinois fossil is called the Tully Monster, and it's only been discovered in the Mazon Creek Formation area. Now this site also shows us how trees and ferns have evolved over the past 300 million years because of how detailed some of these have been preserved. So if you're ever close to that area, go fossil hunting. It's free to do, it's easy to get to, the roads are well maintained, and as I understand it, there's really great fishing there as well. So that might get someone to help give you a ride there. It's in a wonderful area, and there's a few pictures of me doing some fossil hunting in that area, and they are everywhere. So what happens is that all of these mounds that you see are just blown off piles of dirt from coal strip mining. And as the dirt erodes over the years, it exposes more and more of these nodules. And you just go around and you just pick them up off the ground. You don't have to dig for them. You don't have to find them. You just look for them. And we're going to explore more and more of these on the channel as time goes on, but it's an amazing little place to go hunting. So even if you've got to take a day out there, you can even camp out there. It's perfectly fine to do that. And it doesn't cost anything but your time. And I highly recommend it. So tonight we've explored a rare discovery as well as a reference to the bard himself. A Midwinter's Night Dram is worth having in any collection, as well as any trip to the Mazon Creek. So join us on Facebook and Instagram, and if you like what we're doing here, like, comment, and subscribe below. And always remember, share a bourbon with someone. Good night.